Okay, so you guys pretty much all work on build tools around Angular CLI and all that. And like, silly question was like, why should we bother? Like, what's so special about it?
Well, the CLI actually makes it easy for you to, build, to create, build, and like develop Angular applications. So when you start a new project, you have multiple choices on what you're going to do. You can use like a seed project, which was the popular way in AngularJS. And there's still some seed project for Angular, the latest version of Angular, Angular 5. But really, these are like single points in time that then you have to maintain everything. You have to maintain the build system. You have to maintain like when somebody does an enhancement to the seed, you have to upgrade the seed, change the seed. So they don't provide really a lot of hand-holding, and you end up spending more time working on your build system than actually working on your application. And so the CLI is kind of taking the problem one step further. The solution one step further, sorry. And the solution one step further, and basically like giving you a build system that you don't have to worry about, giving you like a set of generation that you don't have to worry about. They just work, and they work because we tested them, and we use them every day in the CLI team and with our third-party like favorite people like you, like NativeScript, for example. So you're testing it for us. And inside Google, we have like different set of standards that we also export a little bit outside of Google as like best practices.
So the CLI version 6 is coming up. And by the way, I love the fact that we're going to match the same versions as how Angular goes. I actually really love the idea because now I know which one is which. So obviously there's going to be some big changes. Like what are like the new cool things that I should expect from there?
Workspaces. Like just thinking that you don't have just one project, but that your place where you have your project, you have multiple projects, and that they can work together, and that you can do actions in each the individual project or in all at the same time. So like going into this monorepo thing, where you are actually fairly confident that the stuff that you're making is going to integrate well with the other stuff because they're all developed in the same workspace. Okay. That for me is what I'm excited about.
And Broker, you have favorite new pieces?
Yeah, what I've been personally working on is just internal refactoring. So we've been able to reduce some of the additional bloat with our installs by getting rid of some of our old dependencies. So if what I did works right, nothing new will show up, which is a good thing. But it sets the groundwork to be able to do some things in the future. But regarding the workspace feature, the thing that I'm probably most excited about supporting is libraries, to be able to generate and develop libraries, not just applications with the CLI. I think it's probably our most requested feature.
Yeah, definitely the most requested one that made it into 6.0. And I just want to do a shout out to David Ergis, who actually is created and develops the ng packager toolchain, and that's what we use to build your library. So big round of applause for that guy. It was super helpful that he worked with us.
You want to talk about update as well? Because I feel that's a super cool thing.
Yes. So two things that I'm really excited about, because I didn't get to go yet, but two things that I'm really excited about after library was ng update and ng add. So with 1.4, we integrated schematics. We brought schematics out in the open world in the Angular CLI, and since then we've been like fixing issues and improving it, updating it. And with 6.0, we're actually adding two features that are schematics, that are based on schematics on top of it, which is ng add and ng update. ng add is simply a convention that you can ng add any kind of libraries that have support for it, and it will automatically, like itself, knows how to update your project and do that for you. So for example, NativeScript is a good example because you can do an ng add NativeScript, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what it's going to do is that it's going to add, it's going to split the project into like a web version and an iOS or Android version, right? A mobile version, sorry. And it does that automatically for you, and that's super powerful, and people will see how powerful it is when they actually get to use it, which is going to be awesome. And ng update, in the same vein, but instead of working on adding new packages and adding new functionality, it basically updates the current functionality that you have in your project, in your workspace. So if you're, for example, you want to update, like a good example is Angular Material, which adds some breaking changes, deprecation. They remove some APIs that were deprecated in the Material 5. And so what they do is that when you do ng update at Angular/Material, it moves you from version 5 to 6, and then fix those breaking changes for you. It looks into your templates and replaces those attributes or those classes that don't match anything anymore and use the new ones. And that's really powerful too, and that's going to be a game changer in the whole JavaScript ecosystem, in my opinion.
I mean, that actually sounds cool. So for ng update, if I use ng at NativeScript first, is there a way for me to also like add an additional hook? So when you do ng update to, let's say, 6.1 later on,
yes,
could that trigger our updates as well?
Oh yeah. Yes, it's totally open to third-party libraries. If you want to do it for your library, we have a set of specification and documentation that you can just add to your, it's a field in your package JSON that tells us when you update from one version to another, run this sets of scripts, of schematics, actually, and it will update your project for you.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool.
It's a really big game changer, as Hans mentioned. And I just wanted to add on that I heard a term used today associated with ng update that explains it in just so simple. It basically makes Angular and the libraries associated with it, for those who buy in to the update process, evergreen. So there's really virtually no reason to not stay up to date with the latest version. By just running a single command, you can update all your dependencies.
And also, like us, like on the native side, if you introduce some breaking changes and everything, it's our responsibility. Rather than say, oh, they didn't read the documentation, we could just say, well, you just run ng update. Like, what's your excuse, right? Like,
exactly.
Because reading is hard sometimes, you know. It's like
well, it's also people don't know where to find the documentation. Like, where is the documentation of NativeScript? Is it on Angular because I'm using Angular, or is it on NativeScript? I mean, for NativeScript, it's pretty straightforward. But for Material, for example, yeah, which is developed by the Material team, the first reaction would go to the Angular.io, which contains the documentation for Angular, but not necessarily how to update Material. So yeah, that will make the update process much simpler and easy for everybody. Cool. My grandmother could do it.
You think?
Oh yeah.
Wow, your grandma is smart.
She's got Node installed and everything.
Yeah. Are you sure she's on Angular or Vue?
Yeah, no, that's fine. She's an Angular-ite.
Okay.
Yeah, is that a thing? Let's make that a thing.
It is now.
There you go.
Yeah, hashtag Angular Riot, right?
Angular-ite?
Angular Riot?
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Anyway. We'll figure out. We'll figure it out. So actually, I really like the idea also of having the workspaces, as you mentioned before. So what would be like the principles around it, like, or in terms of structure? Maybe that.
So the principle is that you have like the workspaces where you have your project. So like that's your base folder that has your node modules and where you have Git initialized. And then you have multiple projects. We expect them mostly to be in like a folder called projects, but you can put them wherever you want. And the idea is that you can interact with each of these projects in different ways. This is where like the word architect comes from. Like this is how you build them and how you interact with them. But building is not just when you actually build your app. We consider that the way that you can interact with them is like, for instance, linting. You might want to lint them in certain ways. On almost all of our default Angular CLI projects, you lint both the tests and your application itself. So you already lint your applications in different ways. You already have two projects, whether you know it or not. You have your browser app, but you also have your end-to-end app, which is actually just a Node app that just so happens to launch Chrome and click a couple of buttons on your app. And each of these are built in different ways. You interact with them in different ways. You will lint and test them, and maybe you even have like these old other processes around them that, for instance, build some assets or that generate some other code that you need. And all of these different ways are ways with which you interact with your project. So it's not just a matter of building. It's kind of like, how can I do stuff with this project? And like, what are all the ancillary project things that I have to actually make it work? Stuff that people would usually put on like very verbose NPM scripts. We hope that they can now put on like this more structured way and like set the options there and change them as they want, and have it all structured in that way.
That makes sense. And just like just one more question around that. It's like, so now NX is actually quite popular. Like, how compatible is that gonna be with it? Do you think there's gonna be anything that will make it more difficult or easier?
I expect that a lot in NX. I expect that the NX folks will want to replace a lot that they have with architect stuff simply because now we maintain them. It's less work for them.
Yeah. We're always in talk with the Norval
Yeah.
folk. They're really great, and like we take their use cases in consideration when we design our things, and we help them build their thing on top of ours too. So it's really a two-way communication channel with them.
Makes sense. And so you, Broco, you said that basically you were doing a lot of refactoring in Angular CLI. Like, what would be like the thing, me as an Angular developer, like, how would I benefit from that?
There's some performance benefits of how the commands were being parsed and run, that they're a little bit more simplified. A lot of that is kind of like the last holdover, and the command parsing is the other one that I worked on, is that they were the kind of last holdovers of what we were using out of the Ember CLI. We were very thankful for the Ember CLI and being built upon it, but as we've evolved, we've had to migrate some different things out. The build process, the generate process with schematics is more powerful than what we had, and then it was like the last holdover of what was still there. So now that that's not there, there's really very little left of the Ember CLI.
I also think that some of the work that you did with the commands and the command parsing and how we can get like the option listing for even the parts that you replace, it's super cool. It's not like static options, and it's not just static like defaults, etc. You can actually get this listing if you replace parts of the CLI and the schematics and architect with others, which I think is extremely cool. Like if people do third party whatever, you just get the options that they need.
So one of the things that we as a team have struggled with, because we've had so much change and it's everything that we've done has moved rather quickly, is keeping up with it with documentation. Especially now with Architect being fully dynamic of like your build and serve commands can have different options based off of the different packagers that you're using or the build tools that you're using within there. The same thing with schematics. If you're using a custom schematic, if you're using NX, how do we provide documentation for those schematics when they're not something that we're even developing that you may be using? So what we've done with the commands and the dynamic parsing that Philippe mentioned is to be able to dynamically get all those commands out for the help commands. So if you want to know exactly what's available, provide the documentation in line as part of the tooling to say, hey, I want to generate a component, or if I think NX provides the ability to generate a reducer because they use NGRX. So you can get all of the help and documentation of those options that they've defined within their schemas for their schematics and get all of that up as well as for the build tooling.
Before it was just a static set of our options, and now it's much more dynamic. That was like a lot of good work there. And also installing CLI now, the CLI itself is basically like, it's not a lot of code, and it's installed under 5 seconds on my machine.
That's pretty awesome, because it used to be like half a minute sometimes, right?
Oh yeah, well it's still the case when you install like all the build system and Webpack and all that. But if you install like the CLI globally or just the CLI in your application, if you update that to the latest version, then it's instant.
So honestly, like I'm a big fan of schematics. Like I mean, a lot of other works that you're doing, like, but I spend a lot of time actually writing schematics as of late, and I found myself advocating for it, like all around. Like, it's not even just in the Angular community, but like I talk to people in Vue and everything. Like, why don't you use it? I was like, oh, because this Angular thing, right? But it isn't. And one thing I'm really struggling, and I'm hoping you guys can help me, is like, how can I do like a 1-2 sentence explanation of what it is? Because it's difficult to nail it down like in an easy way.
Okay.
Tackle that one?
I'll try to tackle that one. You want the elevator pitch of schematics, basically.
Yeah, but literally like 30 seconds one, like.
Okay, so schematics is a process tools, so it can transform your project from one state to another state. It's the process, the workflow that match in the middle. Like for example, if you want to add new code to your application, or if you want to delete old code, or if you want to like just process and like output some statistics on it, it's basically you can use schematics, and schematics are well done for that. So it takes an input, a file system, a project, or some piece of files on a file system somewhere, and it transforms it using a process that you've described using schematics themselves into the different process.
Okay, is that how you would explain that?
Yeah, I'm not as smart as Hans, so I my general thought process is that it's a rules engine that takes in a file system or a section of your file system, makes it virtual, allows you to manipulate it, and spits out the output based off of whatever rules or logic you've decided to apply to it.
Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, I always kind of say, like, yeah, take a project from state A, make some changes to it, and speed out in like state B kind of thing. Like, yeah.
Think of human generators in some, like in the different kind of process, basically. But yeah, like generators in general.
So, okay.
One last thing on that is that the nice thing about it working off of a virtual file system is that if your operations that you're performing against your file system, against that tree, the virtual file system tree, is 10 steps, and it gets through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and fails on 9, you've never committed anything back to disk. So you don't break anything locally if your last step in that process fails, because it's all just done virtually before it gets committed back to the actual file system.
And then so that your local storage stays untouched, right?
Yeah, local storage.
Yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, as a wrist gesture. So the other thing that I find interesting is like slightly less techy, but you guys like spread across like different places. Like you in California, you in Dublin, you in Texas. Am I right?
I'm not. I'm in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Somewhere in the U.S. That's my
Eastern U.S.
Eastern U.S. Yeah.
So we got Charles in New Jersey.
There you go. So you work remotely, yet you seem to collaborate really well. Like, what's your technique? What's your strategy?
So Philippe wakes up the first one, fixes all the bugs. Then Mike and Charles on the East Coast wakes up again, create new bugs, and then I spent the rest of my day having meetings. And then Philippe wakes up.
No, he releases at night, and then I wake up and I see the bugs that were released. It's like, oh, we have to do this.
No, but we got good communication tool. We're really lucky to have people that are independent too. I don't have to, stand over their shoulder, although sometimes I would like to. But no, it's yeah, I think communication works really well. The fact that they have flexible schedule probably helped them too, but it helps us because like sometimes, my day finish at 5 p.m. for me is 8 p.m. for Mike. It's 2 in the morning for you, I think, something like that. So yeah, like the fact that they can be around for most of my day really helps because I'm the one with the communication with the main team. Yeah. So,
but like for me as one of like the remote guys, it really helps. Like Hans does such an amazing job handling like this interface with like the bigger organization with bigger Angular, and then we have to care about like very specific stuff, and we're really free to do our more specific work because Hans does a great job taking care of all of that interface and kind of like shielding us from a lot of meetings as well. Like it's great. So some weeks I only have like 2 meetings total. It's perfect.
I mean, meetings are one of the biggest enemies of a developer, right? A 10 minutes meeting might mean 1 hour wasted, right? Sometimes.
Well, sure, but an hour meeting might mean like 10 hours saved in issues at the end of the day.
True.
So, like
the other nice thing about having the meetings that we have, because we have at least 2 weekly meetings with each other, is to get that FaceTime to be able to communicate real time through video chat, not just through text-based communication.
Slack is super good when you're trying to share, like, this happened, this needs attention, etc. But there's really no replacement to actually having a direct conversation to get some consensus, to agree on the direction forward. So, like, these meetings are important. But I'm very grateful that I don't have as many meetings as Hans does.
Very much. So, and like a question from me, because like we touched a bit on NativeScript and stuff. Like, how much do you guys know about NativeScript yourself? Like
what, internals or how it works or what it's supposed to do?
In general, what do you know about it?
Okay. For me, NativeScript is the way that you get your Angular app that you have a fairly good idea of how it works in the browser, get it working in your mobile devices. And I don't know, what else do you do? I remember mobile devices and getting like it working on all the mobile devices in a roughly consistent interface, because that's the really hard part, because each of them has their own SDK. So I know that part. Do you also do some other stuff like server side?
No, it's just mostly just native mobile applications. Yeah. You have any other opinions? Any more additional fact that you know?
I had looked into using NativeScript a while ago when I was writing more Angular apps. I remember there being a virtual file system or virtual machine that the JavaScript runs in that interrupts with the native APIs through a similar API, so that you can talk to both iOS and Android at the same time.
Is that Cordova? Or
No, no.
No, it's in Cordova. Essentially.
No, because Cordova runs as a web view within there. You actually run native components, and the language, the templating language, corresponds directly to native controls on both platforms.
That's yeah. That's how I explained as well.
Yeah, you can control a drone with it.
You
I
can.
remember that presentation. Loved it.
Was that the one when I was shooting people and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good session. Yeah.
It was fun.
So what do you guys do? And I'll take you one by one. Like when you're not doing techie stuff, when you're not being techies. So imagine there's no computers. What do you do for fun?
I cook pizza.
You cook pizza.
Yeah, that's what I like to. I like cooking.
Oh my god.
Oh wow. I have to try some of that next time I come to Dublin.
If I need
Okay.
a cook, I'm gonna hire you, man. Seriously.
Okay.
It doesn't pay as much being a cook as an engineer, so I don't think it's gonna work out. But his food is really good. I can't
It
recommend
depends on the
enough.
number of Michelin stars you have, right?
That's true. For him, he has 4 Michelin stars in my heart. Me, I like to hike and camp. I like to sail. I have a dog and a wife, so that keeps me busy.
And Broco?
I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I spend time with my family, mostly. Yeah. Well, I used to play more golf, but I spend more time with my family than I do playing golf anymore.
And also, like in terms of like advice, in terms of somebody wanting to give back something to the Angular community, like what's a good way to do it?
Find file issues. You see something, say something.
Yeah.
We have a lot of issues. We're trying to get around them, but really, like making the product better is either you find an issue. If you don't file it, if you don't tell us, we might never know about it.
Yeah.
And the other point is there are a lot of issues, and we should make a better job at marking those that are easy to fix. But you should also like try to see there is a help wanted in a first good issue or first.
I think just the
I think
help.
it's just the help wanted.
Yeah.
GitHub standardized on help wanted, I believe, is the name of the tag.
Yeah. So if you see a tag on an issue, help wanted, give it a go. Or if you think of a story and you want to add it to our wiki, for example, because we're going to start like really nailing down the documentation for 6.0, please, like if you have an idea of an article or something, Medium articles, we're starting to see those pops around about schematics, about like 6.0. These are great too. Yeah.
I'd also say like opening the issue I think is really the important part, and getting a good reproduction in. If it's a bug or just what you want to happen, like you get a good reproduction in, you explain what you want, you actually force yourself to put it down, and then suddenly what was only in your head and only you had like any chance of actually making work, now this whole community can make work. Now this whole community can pitch in. Like it's not just you working on something that you had on your head. Now everyone can look at it, and maybe someone else is actually doing that and they're further ahead than you were, and they can help out. And maybe like just the conversations that happen there, like if like we always talk a lot before we actually end up implementing something. And what I had in my head that, yeah, this is really what we need. After we have actually a meeting and talk about stuff, that's not what's actually going in, because that's not what was actually needed. And like these issues are the way that like people in the community can actually get in and get involved in the whole process. Like the issues and the repros and like a clear description of what you want, that just gets everyone involved and gets everyone on board. And they share your vision and they can actually make it happen with you.
You have anything to add?
I think that is an incredible place to get. If you get to the point where you are filing good quality issues, or even a single good quality issue, and are involved in the discussion about that, is a huge help. The next level beyond that, if you have the time and the capability to do it, work on a pull request for it as well. Whether or not it's a typo in our docs, because I can't type or write well. But that's great. Anything that helps contribute is wonderful.
Cool. So do you guys ever go like on a trips together, like to have fun or something?
Yeah, we come to NGConf every year.
Okay, that's a trip.
It's a big trip for some of us.
We're actually, I'm extremely excited for the next 2 weeks. We're going to get to work together on location in Mountain View. And Charles is going to be joining us there for us to be able to actually work face to face
And hopefully
And
we
have
actually
lots of
get
meetings.
get along together face to face. It's like otherwise maybe we'll just strangle each other. Maybe that's what's going to happen. I don't know.
and hopefully Philippe makes some pizza.
I can like if we have the tools in the house. Yeah, I'll do that.
Cool.
Sounds good. So the final question, the trickiest one. What's your favorite 80s movie?
Well, I go first.
Wow, all right, that just came straight over. All right,
I told you it's tricky.
this issue got assigned to me first. All right, so I'm going to have to go because I based my talk, or my second talk, off of War Games. I enjoy all the dynamics of that.
I love war games. That's a good one. You're the first one to mention that one.
I have no idea when the movies are released.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's 89, 88. It's the same time as like Beetlejuice and Back to the Future and all that.
Okay.
Just one movie.
Oh yeah, sorry, Terminator 2, because Terminator is really like, it's
That was 90.
no, that's 89, the first Terminator.
Ah.
Well, you said Terminator 2.
No, I said Terminator, as well, 2, as well. Yeah,
Spell when you speak, please.
because it's really the story. Terminator is the story of a struggling machine trying to accomplish its goal and being crushed by humans.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the machine learning process wasn't like was
exactly.
slightly faulty, right? Like
Yeah.
it just learned it the wrong way. Felipe?
Is The Nightmare Before Christmas an 80s movie?
Yes.
That's my
wait.
favorite one.
Close.
The
No,
Night-
Nightmare on Elm Street. is-
No, The Nightmare Before Christmas.
No,
Tim Burton.
that's Tim Burton.
Well, yeah, but the
But
year.
if you want a Tim Burton movie, Batman was 80s.
I didn't like that one that much.
I think you still count, right?
What's
yeah.
the
Felipe's-
first Aliens? When was the
Oh,
first
first
Alien?
Alien is 86, 87?
I go for the first
you go.
Aliens. That's a
Yeah.
great movie.
So thanks guys for joining me, and now it's time for a group hack.
What's your favorite 80s movie?
Oh, The Goonies.
Ah,